Welcome to KopiTalk, an NTU-inspired podcast centered around the most relevant and pressing learning issues. I'm your host, Wayne, and today we have a very special guest with us. So if you could please introduce yourself and tell our viewers why they should listen in to our conversation now.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm Professor Veronica Yan. I am an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. So, a little bit of a background, I'm trained as a cognitive psychologist, studying the cognitive mechanisms that underpin effective, long lasting learning and memory. And then on top of that, I study metacognition and motivation. So, how can we get people to want to and enjoy and lean into this effective, self regulated learning?
Right. So I've actually heard that growing up, you were a pretty good student. Like you studied well and you studied a lot. So what transformed you into just being a good student into studying what good learning actually is?
So I was a good student in that I got good grades. And so the things that I was doing were enough to be effective. The question, though, is was I an efficient student? And I don't think I was. I got my good grades by just working really, really, really hard and just spending many, many hours. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to do, first in university and then beyond university, one of the things I was really interested in is human memory. And with human memory, there's many different directions you can go. So one of my potential research directions that I could have gone to in a different PhD program was PTSD. But the one I ended up choosing that really got me was effective learning. And I thought, okay, great. I know what effective learning looks like. I can go and study that. So I got to my lab at UCLA under the Dr. Robert Bjork and Elizabeth Bjork. They're like these two big names in human learning and memory research. And the first several months of sitting in lab meetings, I honestly was kind of confused because they were sitting there talking about how to make learning more difficult, how to get these things called desirable difficulties into our learning. And a lot of the things they were talking about almost seemed at odds with what I had decided was effective learning. I had decided that effective learning means easy learning. Make it easy for yourself. Find things that will make it feel like you're making progress. And it was only after a few months that I realized what I was doing was not the most efficient way of studying. I was getting there by just putting crazy amounts of time in, but I could have been a lot more efficient when I was a student. So I got interested because I thought I was a good student, but then I became even more interested when I realized that there were a lot of things that are actually somewhat counterintuitive that I really could have done a lot better. So that's where my research is now, is how do we help students who are generally motivated, and a lot of students are motivated and hardworking, but we aren't always making the best use of our time. And if we could do that, we could get so much more out of life.
Do you feel that this almost phobia or difficulty might be a cause of failure and the culture and and how society views failure in general, especially in learning?
Yeah, so I do think there is a mindset about difficulty that can be at odds with the reality. So a lot of people really want to lean into the ease because they think that means they're learning better. Or there might be people who simply are averse to the difficulty. The desirable difficulties often make you make more mistakes earlier on, and that's an aversive feeling as well. I don't want to see that I'm making mistakes because it makes me feel bad. So I've definitely had students say, well, I know it's good for my learning, but it makes me feel bad about myself if I realize that I'm trying to test myself and I can't come up with the answer. I'd hate the feeling of drawing a blank. And so we are oftentimes balancing different goals in our life. And sometimes the goal is more about ego protection or sense of self-protection, even if we know in the long run it would be better for us. So I do think there is, when it comes to having people lean into the desirable difficulties, just knowing about them isn't enough. There's a bit of a mindset shift we also need to make to say, you know what, like if I made a mistake, rather than feel bad, I should celebrate it. That yes, I made a mistake. That means I'm on the right path because there's something to be learned here.
Actually, going back to students, I think you've conducted some research about this, correct me if I'm wrong, but the students actually recognize what good learning techniques are, but they still choose not to adopt them. So what do you think is the biggest mental barrier for them
Mm.
not being able to adopt the good studying habits or not being able to let go of bad studying habits?
Oh, that's such a good question. So, one of the biggest barriers is sense of time and effort. And I'm saying perceived sense of time and effort oftentimes is more the barrier than actual time and effort costs. So, one issue is that um, effort and time oftentimes are conflated. So, if you think this is going to be more difficult, more effortful for you, you think it's going to take you longer. Every single one of these cognitive experiments on desirable difficulties has tried to equate for total time on task. So that's why we're talking about the word efficient, not just effective. Given the same amount of time you're willing to put in, you should be able to get far more learning out of that time. So it's not necessarily a time cost per se, but it definitely is an effort cost. But when people say time cost, they also mean other types of things as well. So if I were to just choose a very passive strategy, such as re-listen to a lecture recording or to reread my textbook, I know what that looks like. You start on like 0 seconds, or you start on page 1 and you just play through. You don't have to take any time to decide how to do this. But if you say, I want to engage retrieval practice in my studying, now it's going to take a little bit of time to think, how should I do that? What does effective retrieval practice look like? What should I be trying to ask myself? What way should I be trying to quiz myself? What kind of content should I be focusing on? That is a little extra time cost just in the setup. So that is one way which it might feel like it's a time cost. The third way that people oftentimes think about time cost is I'm running out of time because I was so busy with so many other things that I was not able to find time to do this work, to study for this exam until very late. And the thing is, when time is running low, it's really hard to decide, I'm going to try something new. So what we really need to be doing if we're serious about trying to shift towards more effective habits or strategies is earlier on in the semester, in the year, try to think about what would be good habits to do so that when it comes to crunch time, you are already familiar with them and you don't have to think, how do I start? So it's really hard to replace old habits. But we have to think, I think, very consciously about how we might want to do that and set ourselves up early enough so that when exam time comes, we're prepared.
Let's see.
I'm not sure what that, I'm not, so they were also studying by writing notes and then task switching by bringing their pen to the Post-it note and scribbling and coloring it in.
Yeah. And this is not like this person came up with it. There are a couple of videos where people do this.
So off the bat, I'm skeptical, but I'm going to try to think through why this could be possibly effective. Right off the bat, I'm skeptical because it really seems like they're doing task switching, and I still don't understand the purpose of the black. But let me try to think through and give the creators a benefit or the users a benefit of the doubt. It's possible that while they're scribbling, they're trying to gather their thoughts and trying to organize their thoughts. But let's say in organizing their thoughts, they're really engaging the phonological loop in their working memory capacity, but their visual spatial sketchpad is not being used up very well. And so it's possible the scribbling or the doodling is to deal with the cognitive underload that might be going on within the visual spatial sketchpad. That if they're at least doing that, they're kind of filling up in some general mindless way the visual spatial sketchpad, which might therefore somehow help focus them on their thoughts that they're organizing in their phonological loop. That's the only way I can try to make sense of it. And I'm still very, very skeptical. In part, the reason why I'm skeptical is because when you're really trying to organize your thoughts, when you're trying to study, you shouldn't only be using phonological loop. You should be actually trying to integrate the knowledge that you have and really think about things, not just in words in your head, but also try to think about the structures. That would engage visual spatial sketchpad a bit. And so I would still want to see people using both of those substructures of your working memory capacity. Um, but I do know that there are some people who, for example, have ADHD who find fidget toys really helpful because it kind of takes up a bit of your excess energy. It's possibly that sort of a thing. Um, but I'm really going to want to see some empirical evidence as to how that really works
Right.
because I'm struggling a little bit to try and make sense of it.
Do you want to give it an out of 10 score?
And out of
Out
10,
of 10. Out of 10.
5.
5? That's pretty generous.
Oh, I'm doing the American scale. Okay.
All right.
Let me correct it for the Asian scale. 3.
3? Okay. I was going to give it a 3. The fact that you could come up with a reason why this could possibly work to me, I was like, that's amazing. All right, let's do another one.
I call it the reward sandwiching system because it functions like a regular reward system. But instead of giving yourself spikes of dopamine of scrolling on your phone and getting yourself distracted, you reward your brain with the satisfaction of studying itself. To better understand this method, here's what you need to know. The reason why your brain hates studying is because it makes you feel bad. You feel stressed or frustrated, and over time your brain's going to reject studying to protect itself from those emotions. And all you have to do is control the amount of negativity that you feel and still do what you need to do. Okay, so how does this work? The core idea is to sandwich easier tasks in between harder ones, allowing yourself to feel rewarded or relieved periodically during long study sessions. And this tricks your brain to thinking that studying may feel hard, but you will always be rewarded if you just keep studying. If whenever something gets hard and you go and scroll on your phone, you're teaching your brain that whenever there's a hard assignment, you should just go scroll Instagram Reels, even though you can feel as satisfied or even more relieved when you are done with an assignment. Before you reach your limit and create frustration, switch to an easier task, calm yourself down, and then go back to the hard one. Always walk away with either a complete assignment or studying your favorite subject. You probably want to start with an easy task to kind of build confidence, get yourself into the flow state, and then dive right into the hardest task of the day, because at the beginning of study sessions is when you have the most energy. And then in between, if you want to squeeze in an easier one and then kind of go back to that hard one and then eventually end with an easy task.
It's not the worst advice. One thing I would love, though, is if people, this is still treating the hard task as if it were always going to be aversive, and it's impossible for it not to be aversive. And I don't think that's true. I think we've seen in exercise and playing games that the difficulty itself, in and of itself, can feel rewarding. So it's not that, oh, I have to trick myself with easier things, reward myself in other ways. I do think there's a way we can find the challenge itself rewarding, and then also the feeling of completion after that difficult task rewarding. But if to start off with, if you really, really cannot get your body and your brain to enjoy it, I don't think that's a bad way to start yourself. I just wouldn't end there. So I think that would be what I would say in reaction
Marginally
to that
better.
one. Marginally better, yeah. So
Marginally
5 out of 10.
5 out of 10. Okay. Let's do one more.
If you still take notes like this, I highly suggest you stop. I should not be telling you this, but every question in your exam, including the easy ones, is built using a psychological ladder with 6 levels. Examiners don't test what you write in your notes. They test how well you think. And if your notes can mirror how they want you to think in the exam, they become a cheat code. So here's how you're going to take notes from now on. Write questions. Your brain hates open loops, so it will always seek to close them. And questions create open loops, so you give your brain no choice but to find the answer. For example, instead of writing the heading mitosis versus meiosis and going on to write the differences, you'd use the exam framework question from level 6, which will ask you to distinguish between mitosis and meiosis. That simple tweak instantly frames it like a question you'd find in an exam. He used it to jump from 80s at the beginning of the year to over 95% in honours biology. I don't want students to be in the dark anymore because school didn't teach them how to study. So I dissected the entire framework and put it together for you in one PDF. It's all yours in my bio. I'm rooting for you.
So note-taking is something where people can really be leveling up. The initial starting example is like this wall of text with just the things the professor says. Even worse, I've now seen students simply just snap images thinking, I'm going to read this later, and I don't even need to write anything down. But if you're writing, like trying to write as much down as possible as what the professor's saying, that's really not very good for learning because it means you're also not processing it very well and you're not organizing. What this note system they're talking about in this TikTok is that you are actively thinking and organizing and thinking about what's the level of learning I'm going to have to do? How do I apply? How do I distinguish? How do I use it to create these new ideas? that's going to be promote a lot deeper thinking compared to the more, let me just write down as much as I can. So I absolutely love that because it's orienting students to consuming and using the knowledge more the way the professor would want them to, as opposed to being passive consumers. The problem is that if you're going to try to do this during class, it's very, very hard. We often don't have the time to do that in class. The way I approach this in my class as a teacher is I always assign pre-readings where I tell them, don't spend hours, please skim read it once and then go back and pick out a few main ideas. Because the goal is I want them to come into my class warmed up. I don't want my class to be the first time they've ever heard about it because then you have no time to think about the concepts.
Okay.
So 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10? Whoa. Pretty good. So in general, when you see students looking towards TikTok or looking online for study techniques, what's one thing that you want to tell them maybe as a precaution or how they should approach trying to adopt the habits?
Yeah, so I would say always be skeptical. There are things that might sound fun or are designed to make learning feel easy that could actually shortchange you and waste your time. So it's that skepticism. And then to really think about, is this supported by some cognitive process in the human mind? Is this backed by evidence? Is this something that would actually be something that would come out of a cognitive, like how is it related to cognitive theories? That I think is what we always have to be thinking about. And the same thing for whatever educational buzzword or trend, the way in which people are told you could use this will vary. And we get these new trends every single year or every few months now, perhaps on social media. But what's under the hood in terms of the way our brain works, that's not going to change. So think about what are the processes each strategy is leveraging.
And with that, thank you so much for coming down today. And thank you for watching. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe. And if you're interested in the science of learning, do check out Professor Veronica Yan's work, or you can follow Instagram @InspireNTU.